Mother's Day. If you have a Bible, if you wouldn't mind turning to Luke chapter 7, and we will be looking at verses 1 to 17 today. Luke chapter 7 says this: After he had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. Now a centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, who was highly valued by him. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He's worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he's the one who built us our synagogue." And Jesus went with them. When he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore I did not presume to come to you, but say the word and let my servant be healed. For I too am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him, and turning to the crowd that followed him, said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." And when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant well. Soon afterward, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a considerable crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearer stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us. And God has visited his people." And this report about him spread throughout the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country. Sometimes things in life that are relatively minor turn into major sources of frustration or inconveniences. Little did I know, my car stereo has almost driven me to insanity. About a year ago, I was driving down the street and listening to the radio or whatever, and all of a sudden the screen went black. And so I thought, okay, I'll turn the car off, turn it back on. And so when I got to somewhere to park, I turned it off, turned it back on, and it's still black. And it would start to flicker on and off, but it just stayed black. And so I couldn't connect my phone to the car anymore. I could listen to music, but I had no idea what I was listening to because I couldn't see what was happening. I could only change it on my steering wheel. And so I kind of lived with this for a while, and then this got frustrating that I couldn't connect my phone to the car and couldn't see what I was listening to. And so I went to Walmart, found this discounted stereo, had the stereo put in, and I was all excited about it because it was kind of an upgrade from what I even had. It had Apple CarPlay, so I could plug my phone in, and then I could have directions or listen to music, and so I was really excited about this. And so I get it installed and plug it in, and this is awesome. And then after a few days, I plug it in, and it doesn't connect anymore. And then I plug it in again, it doesn't connect. And so I have to plug it in and take it out maybe 7 times before it actually connects. I'm thinking, okay, it's not that big of a deal. I just have to kind of play with it a little bit. And it keeps doing that. This gets frustrating. People will call me and it won't connect to my phone. It won't connect to my car. Or I'll be trying to listen to music and it's not connecting for some reason. So I bought a new cord. And I thought, okay, maybe it's the cord. So I got like a genuine Apple iPhone cord, plugged it in, and it was fixed. I'm like, this is awesome. I fixed it. And it's such a simple fix. And then after a while, it goes back to connecting kind of intermittently again. So then I think, okay, maybe there was an adapter that it had, so maybe if I plug it directly into the stereo, maybe it will work. So I did that. And it worked perfect. And I was so excited about it. And I'm thinking I'm finally not going to have to play with this. I just plug it in and it's going to work. It worked for about 3 days. And then it went back to kind of intermittently connecting. And then I thought maybe I could clean out the little charger port on my phone. Maybe that will fix it. So I clean out the charger port on my phone, and I plug it in, and it works perfectly. First time, connects. After a few days, it goes back to connecting intermittently. And I'm still in that place, so pray for me. It's a huge source of frustration. I mean, who would think that something so small would be such a source of frustration? Sometimes life is like that. There's things in our life that maybe are relatively minor things that kind of grate at our soul. Maybe it's just going to work and driving in traffic and dealing with people who don't know how to drive, or people we feel like don't know how to drive. Or maybe it's, in our workplace where, we're just kind of going through the daily grind. We don't really enjoy what we're doing, but we're just kind of doing it because we need to provide for our families. Or maybe we're, kind of in our workplace, we feel like we're not recognized for the accomplishments, the things that we contribute. And maybe somebody else is maybe given a promotion and we're kind of forgotten about. Or maybe we're dealing with conflict in our marriage. And not the kind of like divorce level, terrible conflict, but just kind of the daily in and out of like, I see things this way, I see things that way. Maybe it's dealing with singleness. Maybe we're doing okay as a single and we're happy, but we still want to be married. And so we're dealing with that kind of frustration. Maybe we're struggling financially. Maybe it's not like, hey, like I need to go, to the bread line, but like I'm struggling. Like I have to kind of work to just kind of make ends meet, and so it's kind of grating on our soul. There's things in our life that maybe aren't like earth-shattering things that are not going to change the trajectory of our life, but things that kind of can frustrate us. And the question is, how do we deal with these things? How do we approach God when we have things in our life that maybe are kind of serious but not earth-shattering type things? I think that's where the centurion is in this story. We're told in the story that his chief slave was sick to the point of death. It says in the text that this centurion highly esteemed this servant. And so this servant was probably the centurion's right-hand man. It was someone that he put a lot of faith in, probably governing his household, also probably taking care of his children. That was something that servants did in the ancient world. He probably, knows him, is fond of him, has a good relationship with him. And he's sick to the point of death. And this is something that would have been frustrating, but not something that's necessarily going to shock and change his world. This centurion, he probably had a number of servants, and he could get another servant if he wanted to. During this time frame, the lowest paid soldier during this time was paid about 75 denarii. This centurion would have made anywhere between 3,500 to 7,500 denarii. So comparatively, he's incredibly wealthy. He can buy, get a number of other servants to help him in his household. He has a lot of authority. He's a centurion that he has authority over 100 men, 100 soldiers. And so this is frustrating. This is something that, of course, is grieving his heart, but not something that's going to rock his world. And yet, it's something that is meaningful to him. And so he has this relationship with the elders of the Jews, kind of Jewish civil leaders, most likely. And, they hear about this servant that is sick, and so they go on his behalf to Jesus, and they say, it says in the text that they were pleading earnestly. They say, please heal this centurion's slave or servant. And the reason that they give is they say, because he's worthy. They say, he's worthy of this. And they say, he loves our people. He loves the Jewish nation. He's fond of us. He helped build our synagogue. He's worthy to have you do this. He's someone who is our friend. And so they come to him with this kind of merit-based mindset that he's done a lot for us, and now you should do this for him. And part of that is probably a little bit self-serving in that, hey, we want to make sure that we're on this guy's good side. Like he's been favorable to us in the past, and we want to make sure that he's favorable to us in the future. And so they come to him with this kind of merit-based mindset that he's helped us, now let's help him. And sometimes when we think about our approach to prayer, we do it in the same way. Just like these religious leaders or civil leaders, they come to Jesus and they say, hey, he loves our people. We come to God and we're like, I love you. I love you so much. And then we come and say, hey, I've done so many things for you. Just like the elders came to Jesus and said, hey, he's built the temple or the synagogue for us. We say, oh Lord, I've done so many things for you. And we come to God with this kind of mindset that I love you, I've done these things for you, therefore, I'm worthy for you to answer my prayers. Therefore, you should be answering my prayers in the way that I want you to answer them. And so Jesus doesn't even argue with what the elders say at this time. He actually starts to head towards the centurion's house. And the centurion hears about this, and it says in the text that Jesus was pretty close to the centurion's house at this time. And the centurion sends out his friends to him and basically says, don't come to my house. Don't come to my house. Why? He says, I'm not worthy. Notice the contrast there. The elders of the people say, he's worthy for you to do this for him. We're in his debt that you should do this for him because he's done so much for us. And yet this centurion says, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof. Why did he say that? He probably said that because, first, he's a Gentile. He's not a part of God's chosen people as they understood it that way. And also, he just probably was aware of his general sinfulness, the fact that he had fallen short of God's glory, that he wasn't someone who was righteous, as faithful in that way. And he says, I'm a man of authority. I tell people what to do, and I know that you have that kind of authority. And Jesus heals the servant, and he's amazed at this man's faith. And then he says, as I tell you, even in Israel I have not found such faith. You see, these leaders come to Jesus with this merit-based mindset. Hey, I've done this centurion has done things for you. He's done things for the Jewish people. He's built his synagogue. Therefore, you should be obligated to act on his behalf. And on the other hand, the centurion comes to Jesus and he says, I'm not worthy. I'm not even worthy for you to come under my roof. And he says, I understand that you are worthy. He points the focus back to Jesus. He says, you are one who has authority. Like, I'm one who has authority over men, that I tell one of my soldiers do this, and he does that. And I'm acknowledging, like, that you are this greater authority, that you are worthy of a praise and an honor that I can't even be in the presence of. He understood what authority was all about. Imagine a situation, imagine that you're in the military, and your commanding officer, say a general, tells you that you need to go and complete this certain mission. And you go out and you complete this mission and you do it faithfully and you do it exactly the way that the general asks you to do it. And then you come back to the general and you say, okay, I did your mission, now you're going to do my mission. Like, I did what you wanted me to do, and now you need to do what I want you to do. That's foolish. A subordinate officer is never someone, or a superior officer is never in debt to a subordinate officer. It's just not how it works. There's one who has authority, one who sets the agenda, one who has the plan, and those who are subordinate to him or her carry out that plan. And so this centurion, one who has authority, one who has power, he acknowledges that. He acknowledges Jesus, he has authority, he has power, and he's not in debt to me. Just because I love the Jewish people, just because I've built this synagogue, just because I've done these things, doesn't mean that Jesus is in debt to me. And so he says, I'm not worthy. And then they go to the house and the servant is healed. But sometimes when we approach prayer, we approach God, we approach him with that same posture. And I've been working with my son, me and Stephanie have been working with my son about how to ask for things. And Paul is doing a little bit better with that. Actually, this morning, I was really impressed. He's like, oh, Dad, can I please have something to drink? But it's been a process, and he comes back to, Dad, thirsty. I'm thirsty. Dad, I'm hungry. I need something to eat. I need something to eat. I need something to drink. You know, and we kind of have to keep pushing him back to that proper way to ask. And sometimes we have that tendency when it comes to prayer. It's like, God, I need this. God, I need that. God, I love you. I've done these things for you. You need to respond in the way that I want. Of course, it's good to bring our requests to God. He asks us to bring those requests to Him. But I think we need to start at the right place. We need to start with the fact that Jesus is worthy. He's the one who has all power. He's the one who has all authority. And that we are not, that we are subordinate to His authority. And so we come into His presence with that mindset that you are worthy. That you are the one who is to come, the one who is righteous, the one who sets the standard for my life. And so we come to Him and say, Jesus, you're the one who's hung the stars in the heavens. You're the one who rescued me from the pit of the death. You're the one to whom every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. And so we come to Him with that place where we acknowledge His authority. Pastor Andrew Wilson puts it this way: sometimes we have this tendency to pray the Lord's Prayer in reverse. You know, the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. But sometimes what we do is we get to kind of the later part of that where we start just asking Him for things, or we're asking Him for forgiveness rather than acknowledging first who He is. Pastor Wilson talks about a flight that he was on several years ago, and the flight was experiencing severe turbulence, and they were caught in this kind of wind tunnel. And as they were going along, the plane would just kind of randomly drop, maybe 50, 100 feet at a time, and everybody was freaking out. They thought the plane was going to crash. And people are starting to just pray, and Wilson is kind of overhearing people, and there was kind of two variations of the prayers that people were praying. Number one, save us. I'm too young to die. I don't want to die. Save us from this. And then the second was, forgive us. Forgive me for the things that I've done wrong. And Wilson says that sometimes this is kind of our starting point with God. He says after these sorts of petitions, most of us pray, please. This is probably the most frequent type of prayer we utter. God, please give me this job. Fix my marriage. Keep my children safe. Provide for my family. Or more traditionally, give us today our daily bread. Life comes first, then forgiveness, and then physical provision. Left to our own devices, we pray the Lord's Prayer backwards. Without being taught, we say help, then sorry, then please do X for me, then please do Y for others. And then we get to begin to appreciate more fully the one to whom we're praying. Not just as the one who dispenses safety, redemption, and material goods, but for His own sake. Yet Jesus taught us to pray it forwards. The topsy-turvy order of the Lord's Prayer is one reason it's so remarkable. Jesus wanted to make sure the disciples never forgot that prayer is not intended to move from action to relationship. Instead, it's intended to move from relationship to action. This, then, is how you should pray. Our Father. Forget about your formulas and your intercessory cards for a moment and begin praying with one of the most basic words in a child's vocabulary. You're God's child, and He is your Father. Start there, and the rest will flow accordingly. You see, we have this mindset that we come to God first with our requests, and here's the good news. See, this centurion, he acknowledges Jesus' worthiness, that He's the one who has authority, who has power, that he's not even worthy to stand in His presence. But we know something the centurion didn't know. We know that God's face is turned towards us in Jesus. We know that not only is He powerful, not only is He one who has authority, but He's also one who is good. And so we come to Him with that mindset, hey, you are worthy of all honor and power and glory, but we also acknowledge God is our Father. He loves us and cares for us. And so when we approach prayer and specifically things in our life that maybe are inconveniences, frustrations, that maybe not earth-shattering things, we start with that mindset, Lord, you are worthy and you are good. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. And then from there we move to request, to confession, etc. But we start with the character of who God is. So that's kind of the normal kind of inconveniences and frustrations in life. But then the other question is like, what do we do when our whole life is turned upside down? What do we do when the person that we said I do to walks out on us? What do we do when we experience a miscarriage? What do we do when we experience the loss of a spouse? What do we do when we experience the loss of someone close to us? What do we do when our financial situation gets so bad that we need to leave our home or our apartment? What do we do when we get this diagnosis that's just going to transform the direction of our lives? The second story gives us some insight into that. We meet a woman who we're told was kind of in that place. She was first a widow. Her husband has passed away. Back in 1967, there were two researchers, Thomas Holmes and Richard Ray, and they created a do-it-yourself stress test of kind of life changes and how they affect us and the stress they add to our lives. And kind of at the top of the list, number one was death of a spouse. That was weighted at 100. Like, it doesn't get any more stressful, it doesn't get any more terrible than that. Like, that's one of the worst things that you could experience in this life, the death of a spouse. And so she's in that place. And if that would be traumatic today, it would be even more traumatic back then, because not only was there that relationship, but also there was kind of a financial security in that kind of patriarchal culture where a man would be one who provided for the woman and would oftentimes be kind of the representative for the woman in society. And so if it would be incredibly traumatic today, kind of going back to that culture, it would be even more so traumatic. And so she's experienced that loss where she's lost her husband, and that's terribly traumatic. But in the back of her mind, she's probably thinking to herself, at least I have my son. I know this is terrible. This is kind of one of the worst things that could ever happen to me, but at least I have my son. At least I have this, I only have one son, but at least he'll be there to care for me, to provide for me, I can have that relationship with him. At least I have my son. And then her son dies. And we get to this scene that's one of the most horrific scenes that you could ever imagine. A woman who's literally lost everything. She's lost her spouse. She's lost her son. This is hope lost. This is kind of sin and death, kind of the worst that it can produce. This is like the worst experience you could have in life, that you lose everything that's important to you. And Jesus comes on to this scene. It's a funeral procession where they're headed towards the grave to bury the son. And again, it's the worst thing you could imagine. It's death on full display. And Jesus comes up to the woman. It says in the text, he had compassion on her, and he says to her, "Don't weep." Now that's kind of an interesting thing to say. I have to do a funeral this week. And imagine I go into that place and people are mourning. I say, "Oh, you don't need to cry. You don't need to weep." It's weird because there's reason to weep. There's a loss. Especially in this situation, it seems like all hope is lost. It seems like this is the worst that could ever happen to someone, that you lose literally everything in your life. And so Jesus says, "Don't weep." Of course, we know that he's about to rewrite her story. He's about to change the narrative. But Jesus then does something else. It says in the text that Jesus comes up and touched the funeral beer. Not talking about the beer you drink, talking of funeral beer. This was something that actually I had never heard of before. It's spelled B-I-E-R, and it would have been similar to a stretcher, but it would be, of course, made of wood. And so they would put the body on this kind of stretcher rather than having like a coffin like we have today, and they put him on the stretcher and that would lead towards the grave. And so they're carrying this young man's body to the grave, and it's this horrific scene. And then Jesus comes up and he does something interesting. He comes up and he touches the funeral bier. He touches that board. Why does he do that? Most likely the reason that he does that is to stop the procession. Jesus comes up and he stops that procession. And he changes the narrative that, hey, we're not headed to the grave anymore. Stop this funeral procession because we're about to experience a resurrection. We're about to experience a resurrection. And we see in the scriptures that when Jesus comes on a funeral procession, he changes the narrative. Remember the movie Sixth Sense, I See Dead People? Jesus talks to dead people. Jesus talks to dead people. He talks to this dead person in this story. And people think he's nuts. But he says, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And he gets up from the grave. We see in the next chapter, Luke chapter 8, Jairus' daughter dies, and he says, "Child, arise." In John 11, Jesus says, "Lazarus, come forth," and he rises up from the grave. Jesus has this habit of transforming funeral processions into resurrection celebrations. And that's the good news of the gospel. And what's also interesting here, just kind of thinking about the imagery, you think about this man being carried on a wooden bier, a wooden plank. And then in just a short time, Jesus is going to be nailed to a wooden plank. And then he's most likely going to be carried on a funeral bier to the grave, but the grave can't hold him. He changes the narrative. And he changes the story for each and every one of us, apart from Christ, that we are on a funeral procession headed towards the grave. But Jesus has changed our story, and he's changed our funeral procession into a resurrection celebration. That's the good news of the gospel, that he took our place. He took this young man's place who was headed to the grave, and he brought him to new life. And not only was that a physical thing, but also it was a relational thing. That he got up and he started talking, and what does Jesus do? He gives him back to his mother. It's a relationship restored. And that's the hope that we have as believers in Jesus Christ. Sometimes in our life, it's hard to have hope. Life is difficult, but we need that resurrection hope if we're going to be the people that God calls us to be. There was a story I heard about a small town one time, and they were about to build a hydroelectric plant near this town. And as part of building this hydroelectric plant, it meant that this town was eventually going to be submerged with water. And so they gave them notice that they had to leave and relocate. They gave them ample time to do that. But their town was going to be one day underwater. And what happened was kind of interesting. All community improvement stopped. In fact, going down to basic lawn care, people basically stopped cutting their grass. One resident described it this way: where there's no hope for the future, there's no power in the present. Where there's no hope for the future, there's no power in the present. And some of us live as if we have no hope for the future. As we talked about a few weeks ago, life is difficult, and we kind of have this trajectory of life where maybe we start off life and we have all these hopes and dreams, things that we want to accomplish. It's like, I want to, get married. I want to have children. I want to buy a house. I want to do all of these things. And then we get to a place, physically, it happens earlier than kind of financially or relationally, but like we get to a place that you're at like 28, and then you're kind of at your peak. Like that's the peak physically that you're ever at. And then, it's kind of slowly dying from there. And then we kind of get to the end of that trajectory, and it's kind of feels sometimes like a march towards the grave. Our bodies are falling apart. We're losing people that we love. And it feels like everything is being taken away from us. And oftentimes, we carry ourselves around like we're on that funeral procession that ends in the grave. And some of us, maybe we need that touch of Jesus today that stops the procession and say, hey, you're not headed towards the grave. You're headed towards resurrection, that I'm going to change your story and make you new. As believers in Jesus, we can celebrate the resurrection, that the resurrection is our hope, that one day our relationships with God and with others will be restored, and we'll spend forever with Him in a new heaven, new earth, have a new body, a new hope, a new place to live. And so maybe some of us need to be reminded today that, hey, you're not on a funeral procession. You're headed towards a resurrection celebration. And when we have that hope, it changes how we live this life. Malcolm Muggeridge puts it this way. He says, "For myself, as I approach my end, I find Jesus' outrageous claim ever more captivating and meaningful. Quite often, waking up in the night as the old do, I feel myself to be half out of my body, hovering between life and death, with eternity rising in the distance. I see my ancient carcass, prone between the sheets, stained and worn like a scrap of paper dropped in the gutter, and hovering over it myself like a butterfly released from its chrysalis stage and ready to fly away. Are caterpillars told of their impending resurrection? How in dying they will be transformed from poor earth crawlers into creatures of the air with exquisitely painted wings? If told, do they believe it? I imagine the wise old caterpillars shaking their heads. No, It can't be. It's a fantasy. Yet in the limbo between living and dying, as the night clocks tick remorselessly on, I hear those words, I am the resurrection and the life, and feel myself to be carried along on a great tide of joy and peace. In this life, we face trials. Sometimes there's those little things that kind of grate at our souls, things that are not earth-shattering. Other times they are, things that just change the trajectory of our lives. But there's two things we need to be reminded of. First, we need to be reminded that Jesus is worthy. He's the one to whom every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. Jesus said in Matthew 28, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. As believers in Jesus, there's nothing that happens that's outside of the purview of what God has allowed to happen. That nothing catches God by surprise. And so we can approach prayer with that mindset, Lord, you are worthy. You are the one who's in control. You are the one who has authority. And I trust you because I know that you're good and I know that you love me. That in the words of the song we're about to sing, that you are the one who's worthy to break the seal and open the scroll. The Lion of Judah who conquered the grave. He is David's root and the Lamb who died to ransom the slave. And so we acknowledge Jesus is worthy. And also, we're reminded of the hope that Jesus has stopped our funeral procession. That we were once lost. Ephesians 2 says that we were dead in our sins. That we were on a funeral procession headed towards the grave, and Jesus came into our life, made us new, and changed our funeral procession into a resurrection celebration. And so as believers, we have that incredible hope that we can walk in each and every day, that we can live lives of faithfulness, we can live lives of sacrifice, we can live lives of love because we have that hope. Because Jesus has made all things new. And one day He's going to raise our bodies to new life, new bodies, new heaven, new earth, and we'll be with Him forever. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you that you are the one who is worthy, and we acknowledge today, as the centurion did, that we are not worthy. We are not worthy for you to come into our lives, for us to even come to you, and yet you have reached out to us in Jesus. That you came to the earth, lived a sinless life, and died on the cross so that we might experience life. We thank you, Lord, that while we were headed for an eternity separated from you, while we were the ones who were on that funeral bier headed towards death, you came in and yourself was strapped to a board. You yourself took our place so that we might experience resurrection, so that we might experience a new hope, a new life in you. Lord, help us to walk in that today. Help us to walk in your authority and your goodness, and also the hope that you've given us in the resurrection. Lord, if there's anyone here today who doesn't have that resurrection hope, Lord, I pray that today would be the day that they turn from the direction that they're going, from whatever they're trusting in currently, and turn and say, Lord, I want to follow after you. I want your life. I want you to be the authority because I believe that you're worthy. Lord, we thank you for who you are. As we see who you are, may we submit to you in obedience and walk forward in hope. In Christ's name I pray.